1989, while concurrently holding other roles including manager of the Division of Family and Community Services. Father Rubey is the founder and director of a program called Loving Outreach to Survivors of Suicide Loss. He created this unique ministry that brings together people to support one another at a time when they find they are irreparably broken. According to Bruce Engel, manager of Loss, Father Rubey has created a valuable and necessary support service for survivors. There is no greater pain than one could experience, and he has provided a vehicle to find hope. Through Loss, Father Rubey's talents have touched people in other countries as far as China. Thank you so much for all your work, Father Rubey.
Thank you very much. I'm deeply honored to be here this evening, and the work I've done over the past 34 years has been very enriching and very fulfilling. Suicide is different than other forms of death, and we don't have the answers. What we do have is hope. Hope that lives can be recreated after the devastation of a suicide. And earlier this week, we commemorated, or our country commemorated, the 5th anniversary of the Virginia Tech tragedy. And there is such a grave misunderstanding about mental illness. There were 32 people who were killed, and they erected 32 crosses to commemorate the 32 people who were killed, and a very brave young woman went out there and put a 33rd cross there to remember the young man who perpetrated this horror. And just to give you an idea of how misunderstood mental illness is, I was watching the few days after the tragedy, I was watching the television coverage, and this one newsman said, now we are going to put a picture of the young man who did this, and you're going to see the picture of an evil person. And this young man suffered from mental illness, and I was just thinking, how would his parents react if they saw on television their son described as evil? That's an idea of how misunderstood mental illness is. People are not mentally ill because they want to be, because they brought it on themselves. I think it's important that we understand that mental illness has ferocious impacts on people. And there are horror stories about people who are mentally ill. But they are sick. They suffer from an illness. And the more we can take away the stigma, that any organization that is working on this needs our support so that people do not have to suffer quietly or in privacy. A number of years ago, Dr. David Satcher, who was the Surgeon General under President Clinton, and he came and he talked to the members of the Loss group. And there were probably 500 or 600 people in the audience, and he was the first Surgeon General that took mental illness as a special project while he was Surgeon General. He told the group, I'll never forget this, now this is back in the late 90s, he said, on any given year, there are 50 million people in our country walking around with untreated forms of mental illness. It gives you an idea how pervasive this is. And people are afraid to seek help for fear that they're going to be labeled, for fear that they're going to be made fun of. Whatever we can do to enlighten people that mental illness is an illness like diabetes, like cancer, heart disease. And I am seeing the last few years in the death notice. I read the death notices every day, and there's been a few instances where people have, in the death notice, have said their loved one had a courageous battle for mental illness, and they lost. They had taken their lives. I think the more we can have statements like that, we educate people. And we see it all the time in death notices where people had a courageous battle with cancer. They died from this illness. Well, people die from mental illness too. We call it suicide. Just last Sunday, Nicholas Kristof had, I don't know if any of you read the New York Times, he had a wonderful article in there about the veterans coming home. And he said there have been more veterans, men and women, coming home from Afghanistan and Iraq. There have been more suicides than all of the people who have died in battle. And that gives us an idea. Well, this is one population where they need our help. So whatever we can do to promote awareness of mental illness, and the people can come forward without being ashamed, embarrassed, or afraid. Thank you very much.
Craig, would you please come forward?